Well, happy Wednesday. Hopefully everyone's having a glorious Wednesday. And there's stories like this that just makes me upset. And I don't have an answer. I don't really have an answer with this. I don't understand why this is even up for the debate. I don't exactly understand why this is a thing. It makes me mad. New York Times. The New York Times, a fairy magazine. Judge sides with family fighting Florida's ban on gender care for minors. Don't know why this is up for the debate. I think it's child abuse. I think these parents need to be looked at. That's just my humble opinion. These kids don't exactly understand what's happening. They're probably confused. They're probably on TikTok, and they may be perceived to have certain mental disabilities or disorders that are not really there. That's just my opinion. I don't know. I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't really deal with kids on a regular basis, so I don't know. A federal judge wrote that the plaintiffs suing to block New York laws likely to prevail on their claims that prohibition is unconstitutional. I mean, we're not trying to prohibit that care, we're trying to prevent it because it's child abuse, in my humble opinion. A federal judge in Florida issued a scathing assessment on Tuesday of the state ban on gender transition care for minors, asserting a ruling that the family with transgender children who sued the states are likely to prevail on their claim that prohibition is unconstitutional. Judge Robert L. Hinkle of the Federal District Court of Tallahassee ruled specifically that 3 transgender children can be prescribed puberty blockers despite the new state law, which also adds new hurdles for adults to seek similar care. But as legal challenges have been mounted and new restrictions on transition care have been enacted across the country, Judge Hinkle ruling exemplifies this kind of chilling reception that bans may receive from judges. It's child abuse. You are preventing a child from growing up because they have a mental disorder. That's it. It's a mental disorder. It's body dysphoria or gender dysphoria. Gender identity is real, Judge Hinkle wrote, adding a proper treatment can include mental health therapy followed by puberty blockers and hormonal treatments. Florida has adopted a statute that rules that prohibits these treatments even when medically appropriated. I don't think it's appropriate to neuter or spade your kids. That includes puberty blockers, which are not reversible. Judges issued a preliminary injunction in response to an emergency request by families of the 3 children, and they and others have sued the state of Florida in March over the administration ban on gender transition care for minors, and that then widened their suit to take a new law after Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican, signed it in May 17th. The plaintiff urged Judge Hinkle specifically to block one part of the law that bars doctors and nurses from prescribing or administering transition-related medicine to children, and another part that exposes medical providers to criminal liability and professional discipline for doing so. This is wrong. We are literally destroying kids, and we're going to see we're actually already seeing it. We're seeing people that detransition sue the medical industry. I think they should be also suing their parents, but that's just my humble opinion. To me, I find this child abuse. The injunction granted by Judge Hinkle does not apply to other aspects of the far-reaching legislation, which also bars gender transition surgery for minors, alters child custody statutes to treat transition care as equivalent to child abuse, and forbids the use of state funds to pay for transitional care. Even so, the judge wrote dismissively the arguments offered by the state, calling them a laundry list of purported justifications for the statute and rules, that were largely pretextual and in any event does not call for a different result, concerning that the state claims that professional associations that endorse gender transition care had done so for political reasons. The judge wrote, "If I ever a pot called the kettle black, not black but black, it is here. The statute and the rules were an exercise in politics and not good medicine." I disagree. I disagree here. Lawyers for plaintiff families interpreted the ruling on Thursday as possible extending to other transgender minors throughout the state. The court addressed specifically a question in front of it, but also issued a very strong ruling saying that the bans are unlikely to survive a constitutional scrutiny, said Jennifer Livy, a lawyer for the plaintiffs and a senior director of transgender rights at the GLBTQ Legal Advocates of Defenders. She noted that Judge Hinkle's 44-page ruling drew conclusions far beyond the scope of the three families in the case, the power of the ruling to make it clear that the law is constitutional. How is it constitutional? Because prohibition is unconstitutional. We are trying to prevent kids from being abused. We're trying to prevent kids from irreparable harm onto their body. And how is that unconstitutional? Tell me how it's unconstitutional to save kids from themselves and from their parents and from the medical field. The Florida Department of Health declined to comment on the ruling, citing continued litigation. The legislation codifies policies adopted last year by the Florida Board of Medicine and Board of Osteopathic Medicine, whose members are appointed by the governor, that ban hormone treatments for people under 18 unless they were already receiving such care. Judge Hinkle's ordered a temporary block those rules as they pertain to the three plaintiffs. The law also includes penalties for doctors who violate it, including prison terms up to 5 years. It goes beyond similar legislation in other states by adding new restrictions for adults receiving transition care, including requirements that consent forms to be signed and prescriptions for hormone treatments to be obtained in person instead of through a telemedicine appointment. I mean, if you're going through a mental illness, the least you could do is show up in person. Is that too much to ask for? Is that too much to ask for? Under the new law, only doctors are allowed to prescribe transition-related medicine. Nurse practitioner and physician assistants who have been providing the treatment for many patients can no longer do so. Those provisions were not blocked by the judge order and remain in effect. More than a dozen states have adopted bans and other restrictions on transition-related care for children and teenagers in the past year. Proponents say the bans protect children from medical treatments that they see as harmful and unproven. But the stance defies much of the medical establishment, which views the care as medical necessary, beneficial for some children who have gender dysphoria. We're telling these kids to ruin their bodies in hopes that they live a productive life. But the issue is that they're kids. We have tattoo laws stating that you can't get a tattoo if you're under the age of 18 because you may regret it down the road. Opponents of the Florida law says it stands out for being particularly mean-spirited, as Human Rights Campaign describes it. Lawyers for the families argue that the law threatens to cause irreparable harm because parents would be deprived of their fundamental right to make medical decisions for their children. Sometimes we gotta protect children from their parents in the medical field. And the children themselves will suffer a cascading of mental and physical injury from being denied care. You mean they have to grow up? Is that the physical injury? Or are they using a scare tactic that they may cause self-harm injuries? After the bill was passed, Planned Parenthood warned patients that it would suspend providing gender transition care for its Florida clinics until mid-June so it could develop a new consent forms for adults receiving the adult care and change its practice to comply with the new law. Other clinics have relied on nurse practitioner to provide care, have stopped prescribing it indefinitely. See, this is the part where I don't really like it. To prevent nurses, nurses are fully capable of prescribing medicine. And if they're just calling out this particular one, I don't think that's going to stand on legal grounds. Now, I am talking about adults that want to transition because they have made that decision as an adult. I have no issues with adults transition. Just I make that out there. It's mainly for the kids. Before he signed the legislation, Mr. DeSantis, who has since announced a presidential bid, criticized puberty blockers and other forms of gender transition care for children. That's wrong, and we're glad that we put a stop to it in the state of Florida. He says it's wrong to be sexualizing these kids. Yeah, it is wrong to have gender ideology and telling kids that they may have been born in the wrong body. Not body, but body. Which is terrible for the self-esteem to say that you're born in the wrong body. We're supposed to love ourselves as we are. The legislation was part of an avalanche measure focused on the LGBTQ people as Florida Republican-controlled state. Legislature passed during the annual session. It's really more about the tea than the rest, to be honest. Can we at least be honest about that? Lawmakers advanced bills that required public school employees to call students by pronouns matching their gender on the birth certificate, no matter the child's preferences. That to make it a misdemeanor to use restroom in public buildings that do not correspond to the person's gender at birth, and then punishes businesses that admit minors to adult live performances, including drag shows. Now, the preliminary injunction has been issued. Plaintiff's legal challenge to the law will move forward. It remains unclear how bans on gender transition care for minors will ultimately fare in courts. One indication it could be immediate. A judge is expected to rule soon on the lawsuit to overturn legislation passed in Arkansas in 2021. That was the first to forbid medical treatment for children and teenagers seeking gender transition. I think Sweden also is borrowing this because it says it needs to be more information. Let's see. But yeah, I think Sweden also banned it because it's kind of new. Don't get me wrong. I know that there's been cross dressers, drag queens. I understand that there's been transgenders for decades now. They've been eunuchs throughout the ages, but the care that we're giving these people is still relatively new. I think people forget that modern medicine is extremely modern. There's things that we know that works, and then there's always the experiment or the new technology, and this kind of falls into that new technology. Now, I think there may be some legal grounds to why the judge ruled this way, but I still think that it's supporting child abuse because I don't think any child is born in the wrong body, and I don't think it's okay to allow them to make life-changing decisions that affects them physically down the road because they may regret it. I think it's between 2 to 4% of all kids that transition end up detransitioning, and that's too many, way too many. With that being said, that is my video for today. Have yourself a wonderful day, morning, or evening.